They always told me the scar on my cheek came from a house fire, one I barely survived when I was 2 years old. I never questioned it. Not really. But one Saturday morning, while flipping through a newspaper my mom had just tried to throw away, I saw a photo of a missing girl, and she looked exactly like me. Same red hair, same eyes, just no scar. And from that moment on, the version of my life I'd always believed in started to slip away. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Jessica Miller. I'm 33 now, living just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. But back then I was 12. My world was small and safe. Just me, my mom and dad, and our quiet house at the end of Pine Hollow Road. Every Saturday morning was the same. My dad would fix something around the house. My mom would tidy up and read the paper. And I'd be curled up on the couch texting my best friend Sophie or sketching in my notebook. I had this scar, long and pale, stretching from the corner of my left eye down across my cheek. It was the first thing people noticed about me. My parents always said I'd gotten it in the fire, that the doctors did their best, but it was permanent. They were gentle about it, supportive, told me I was beautiful, that it made me strong. I believed them. For a while. That morning started like all the others. Sun coming in through the living room windows, coffee brewing in the kitchen, my dad kneeling in front of the sink cabinet with a screwdriver and a half-laughing groan. The cupboard door was crooked again. My mom wiped her hands on her apron and said she was heading out to grab the mail and the paper. "Okay, Mom," I called back without looking up. A few minutes later, she came in with a stack of envelopes and magazines, set everything on the coffee table, and flipped open the newspaper. I was still messaging Sophie when I heard her go quiet. I glanced up. She was staring at something in the middle pages, her mouth just slightly open. "What is it?" I asked. She blinked like I'd startled her, then gave this strange half-smile. "Oh, nothing, honey. Just something silly." She folded the paper too fast and took it straight to the trash. Even my dad looked up at that. "You okay?" he asked her. "Fine," she said. But her voice was higher than usual, and her hands were shaking a little. They didn't want me to see whatever it was. I could tell. That same day I had another dermatologist appointment. I'd been going since I was little. Every few months, more creams, more photos, more quiet reminders that healing takes time. I didn't hate it, but I didn't see the point anymore. Nothing ever changed. On the way out the door, my dad gave me one of his usual pep talks. "Remember to ask the doctor about the cream. Any side effects. You're doing great, kiddo." I told him I would. I meant it. But as I stood on that porch with the warm May air brushing across my face, I realized something. That newspaper. It wasn't in the trash anymore, and my mom was nowhere in sight. I stepped off the porch, my backpack slung over my shoulder, and walked toward the bus stop. I should have been thinking about the appointment or what I'd say to the doctor. But my mind kept circling back to that newspaper, and whatever it was that made my mom go pale. At the time, I told myself it was probably nothing. Parents worry over dumb stuff. Maybe it was a crime report, or something political. But that afternoon, when I walked past a newsstand near the clinic, I saw the same paper sitting right on top. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. I picked it up. I paid for it. And I put it in my bag. I didn't open it. Not yet. But I was going to. At the clinic, I checked in like I always did. Signed the clipboard, gave my name, took a seat in the far corner of the waiting room. The air was sharp with antiseptic and too cold like always. I pulled the newspaper from my bag but didn't open it right away. I just held it in my lap, feeling the weight of it too light for what it might contain. I could still picture the way my mom had looked at it that morning, the way her face changed just for a second before she threw it out. I don't know what made me hesitate. Maybe part of me already knew what I'd find, and I wasn't ready yet. A nurse called my name, and I folded the paper, tucked it back into my bag, and followed her down the hallway. Dr. Smith was already waiting like always. He was one of those soft-spoken types, mid-50s gray at the temples, wire-rimmed glasses, kind eyes. He smiled when he saw me and asked how the cream was working. I told him the usual, it helped a little, but not enough to notice. He nodded, wrote something down, and motioned for me to sit under the exam light. The brightness of it always made me squint. He leaned in close, examining the scar with the same careful fingers he'd used since I was 3. "The texture's changing," he said quietly. "There's some flattening along the upper ridge. Pigmentation's evening out, too." I nodded, not sure what to say. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel progress. But it never looked any different to me. After a pause, I asked him about other options. Surgery, lasers, something that would work faster. He didn't flinch, just leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms like he'd been expecting the question. "There are other treatments," he said, "but they're invasive, expensive, and not always predictable. For someone your age, we usually wait." Then he pulled up a set of photos on his computer, old ones taken at each checkup since I was little. I leaned in. There I was, age 3, just after I'd first come to him. The scar had been raw, then darker and more swollen. Over the years, it had softened, faded a little. He pointed to the differences, but I barely heard him. I was staring at the earliest photo, trying to remember anything about that version of myself. Nothing came. Just static. No memories. Not even a flash. That was strange, wasn't it? You'd think I'd have at least one image from before the age of 3. Some vague dream, some color or voice. But there was nothing. When the appointment ended, I waited until Dr. Smith stepped out to grab the prescription. Then I pulled the newspaper back out and flipped to the missing persons section. I wasn't sure why. I hadn't even seen what page my mom had reacted to. But something made me stop there. And that's when I saw her. 3rd row down last column. A girl, maybe 5, maybe 6, in a sun-faded photo. Red hair, pale skin, green eyes that looked just like mine, and the left cheek. Smooth. I stared at it for a long time. At first I thought it was just the hair, the resemblance. But the longer I looked, the more it felt like I wasn't just looking at a stranger. I was looking at someone I knew. Or should have known. The girl's name was Jenny Clark, missing since age 2. Vanished from a foster home 10 years earlier after a warehouse fire. There was a contact number under the photo. Something about a family member still looking. I read the paragraph 3 times. It didn't say where she was from. Just last seen near Monroe County. I didn't know where that was. But what caught me was the timing. 10 years ago. Same age as me. Same age as when I supposedly came out of that house fire. I folded the paper again, slid it into my bag, and picked up the envelope of prescriptions from the front desk. My mind was moving too fast to track. On the bus ride home, I didn't talk to anyone. Just sat by the window, holding my phone, staring at the number printed on that ad. I kept telling myself it was stupid. Coincidence. People look alike all the time. But I couldn't stop staring at that picture in my mind. That night after dinner, I went up to my room and pulled the paper out again. Read the blurb, read it a 4th time. My parents were downstairs, talking in low voices, the kind they used when they thought I couldn't hear. I took out my phone, opened a new text, and typed, "Hi. My name is Jessica. I saw the missing person article in today's newspaper." I hovered over the send button for a while. Then I pressed it. The second it sent, I regretted it. My heart started racing. What was I doing? They were going to think it was a prank. Some kid fooling around. I tossed the phone on my bed, buried my face in the pillow, and wished I could take it back. A few minutes later, There was a soft knock at my door. My mom peeked in, then came and sat on the edge of the bed. She looked tired. My dad followed behind and leaned against my desk. "We just wanted to say sorry," she said. "I know we were acting strange today." My dad nodded. "We've had a lot on our minds. Work stuff. Money." I didn't believe it. Not really. But I let it slide. I didn't bring up the newspaper. I didn't tell them I'd texted that number. I just nodded. "Okay." My mom smiled and reached for a hug, but when she did, the edge of the newspaper peeked out from my bag. She froze. Her expression changed just for a second. "Where did you get that?" I told her I'd bought it at the clinic kiosk. Her face went pale. My dad stepped forward. "That paper isn't meant for kids. It has things in it, disturbing things. It's just a newspaper." I said, more confused than angry. "Why are you both acting so weird about this?" My mom reached for the bag, but I pulled it away. "Stop. What's going on?" There was a beat of silence, then another. Something passed between them, an unspoken signal. My dad reached out fast, grabbed the paper from me, and stepped back. "Jessica, we're asking you to trust us. Trust you about what I stood there staring at the people I'd called my parents my whole life, and I didn't recognize them. You're not making any sense." They didn't answer. They just left the room and closed the door behind them. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands shaking, phone still warm from where I'd held it earlier. And then it vibrated. One new message. Unknown number. I opened it. It said, "Hi. This is Samantha Clark. Can you tell me more about the photo you saw?" I didn't answer right away. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the screen. Because even without replying, I already knew. Whatever this was, whatever came next, I wasn't going to be able to unsee it. And I wasn't going to be able to go back. Not ever again. I didn't respond to the message right away. I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone resting in my hand screen glowing faintly in the dark. "This is Samantha Clark," it had said. "Can you tell me more about the photo you saw?" I read it again, then locked the phone and set it down beside me. For a while I just sat there listening to the quiet thud of the dryer downstairs and the soft creak of the floorboards as one of my parents walked past my door. I wanted to open it to ask them outright if any of it was true, but something held me back. There was a heaviness in the house that night, a kind of tension I hadn't felt before. Not even when money was tight or when one of them got laid off. This was different. Like they were afraid of something they couldn't name. When I finally went downstairs, they were sitting at the dining room table. My mom was flipping through a stack of mail, not really looking at any of it. My dad had a pen in his hand but wasn't writing anything. I told them about the appointment first, about what Dr. Smith had said. The topical cream was working slowly. He'd mentioned laser therapy as a possible option later on. As soon as I said that, they exchanged a look, quick but not subtle. My mom's fingers stopped moving. My dad set the pen down and folded his hands. "We'll talk to him ourselves next time," he said. "But right now we just can't afford anything beyond the basics. We've got tuition coming up." I nodded, trying to take it in stride, but it stung a little. I knew they'd been saving for high school, but I guess I'd hoped they might be more open to the idea. I told them he'd shown me pictures, old checkup photos from when I was 3 onward. My mom looked up sharply. "Pictures," she said too quickly. "What kind of pictures?" "Just the ones they've always taken," I said. "Progress shots." "Why?" Her hand trembled slightly and she set the mail down. "No reason. I just wasn't expecting that." My dad cleared his throat and stood up, muttering something about needing to check the garage. My mom tried to smile but didn't quite manage it. "I'm just tired," she said. "It's been a long day." I left it alone. Went back up to my room, closed the door quietly behind me. I pulled the newspaper out of my bag and set it on my desk, smoothing out the creased page. Jenny Clark, missing at age 2, taken from a foster home that burned to the ground. No leads, no suspects, just a single contact number and a sister who hadn't stopped looking. I picked up my phone again and reread the message. Then I typed back, "I think I saw her photo in today's paper. I don't know anything for sure, but she looks like me." I hit send before I could change my mind, and almost immediately I wanted to throw the phone out the window. I had no plan, no idea what I was getting into. I was 12 years old and suddenly convinced that the life I'd always known might not have started the way I was told. The reply came back a few minutes later. Short, simple. "Can you talk right now?" I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the keys. Then I typed, "Not tonight. I'm not alone." I didn't hear back after that. I set the phone down, changed into pajamas, and lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the faint glow of the street lamp outside my window. My room, the posters on the wall, the books stacked beside the bed, the faint smell of lemon detergent on my sheets had always felt like a safe place. But that night it felt different, like I was borrowing it, like it didn't belong to me the way I thought it did. The next morning, my parents acted like everything was fine. My dad made pancakes. My mom talked about the grocery list. I didn't bring up the newspaper, neither did they. After lunch, I asked if I could spend the night at Sophie's. It wasn't unusual, I'd done it dozens of times, but the way they reacted gave me pause. My dad glanced at the clock. "It's already after 5, he said. "How about we drive you?" "I can take the bus," I said. "It's not a big deal." My mom came in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "Actually," she said too quickly, "why don't we have a movie night instead? Just us." "I already told Sophie I was coming," I said. "She's expecting me." My dad stepped closer. "We're not trying to keep you from your friends. We just think maybe we've all been a little stressed. It might be good to take a break. No phones, no outside noise, just the 3 of us." I didn't say anything, just looked at them. And for the first time in my life, I didn't trust what I saw on their faces. That night, while they were in the other room, I packed a small overnight bag. Toothbrush, clothes, phone charger, the newspaper. I zipped it shut quietly and set it by the door. My plan was to walk to Sophie's without asking. I'd done it before. It wasn't far. But before I could even grab my coat, my mom came into the room holding a glass of water. "Here," she said, "you looked pale earlier. Maybe low blood sugar." I took it more out of habit than anything. It was warm, slightly sweet. I didn't think much of it until 10 minutes later, when my arms started to feel heavy and my vision went soft around the edges. My dad was already waiting by the door with his keys. "We'll drive you," he said. "It's no trouble." I tried to tell them I was fine, that I could go on my own. But by the time we pulled out of the driveway, the words were already slipping away. My head leaned against the window. I remember watching the streetlights blur past my neighborhood, fading into something unfamiliar. I knew the way to Sophie's house by heart. But this wasn't it. The roads were too narrow, the trees too thick. I wanted to sit up, to speak, to ask where we were going, but my mouth wouldn't work. My last clear thought was the setting sun hanging low in the sky behind us, and then everything went dark. When I woke up, it was dark. Not the soft dark of my bedroom or the kind that comes with a hallway nightlight left on just in case. This was different, thick and unfamiliar, the kind that made everything feel a little too quiet. My eyes took a minute to adjust. I was lying on a narrow bed, the ceiling low overhead, and I could hear the faint sound of insects outside. There was a dull ache behind my eyes, like I'd slept too hard or too long. Slowly, I sat up. The air smelled like dust and vinyl mixed with something faintly metallic. It took me a minute to realize where I was. We were in the camper, the old one my parents used to take out once a year, usually just for a weekend at some rural state park. But this wasn't a campground I recognized. Through the small window above the bed, I could see trees. Just trees. Thick, unbroken forest in every direction. The light outside was fading fast, sinking into that strange blue haze that comes just before full night. I swung my legs off the bed, trying to steady the feeling in my head. My body still felt heavy, like I hadn't shaken off the sleep completely. A few feet away, I heard the door unlatch. My parents stepped inside, both of them moving carefully like they weren't sure how I was going to react. My mom tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You were out for a while," she said softly. "We thought it might be best to get away for a bit, clear our heads." My dad stood just behind her, arms crossed. "You've been upset," he added. "We wanted to give you space. Together." I looked between them, my mouth too dry to speak. None of this made sense. "You said we were going to Sophie's," I managed finally. "You said you'd take me." My mom sat down on the edge of the bench across from me. "You were exhausted. You fell asleep in the car. We didn't want to wake you." My chest felt tight. I didn't remember falling asleep. I remembered that glass of water. I remembered how fast it had hit me. There was something in it I said more to myself than to them. My mom's face changed just slightly. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "We would never." "Jessica, you're our daughter." I didn't answer. I stood up slowly and moved toward the door. "I want to go back," I said. "This isn't right. I didn't agree to this." My dad stepped in front of the door before I could open it. "Please just sit down. Let's talk." His voice wasn't sharp or threatening. If anything, it sounded tired, like he'd been rehearsing this conversation in his head for a long time. "You saw something in that newspaper, didn't you?" He didn't wait for me to confirm. He already knew. "It's not what you think," he went on. "But we knew this day might come." My mom wiped her hands on her jeans and looked up at me, eyes glassy. "We should have told you sooner. We didn't know how." They asked me to sit. I didn't want to, but I did. Because even then, a small part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, there was a version of this story that made sense. My dad sat on the small bench across from me, folding his hands on the table between us. "There was a fire," he said. "But it wasn't our house. It was a warehouse. A bad place. There were people. Hurting children. You were there. You were injured. Left behind." My mom was quiet, her voice barely audible when she spoke. "We weren't supposed to be there. We'd followed a tip. Someone we knew told us about the fire. When we found you, you were barely conscious. No one else was coming. The place was in ruins." "So you just took me?" I asked, and my voice came out thinner than I expected. My dad looked at me, his eyes steady. "We called for help. No one came. No one wanted to talk about what that building really was. It was easier for everyone if it just disappeared. But we saw you and we couldn't leave you there. We couldn't." I wanted to ask why they hadn't gone to the police later. Why they hadn't tried to find out who I really was. But I already knew the answer. They were afraid. Afraid they'd lose me. Afraid of what it would mean if anyone found out what they'd done. My mom reached into a drawer and pulled out a small photo creased and yellowed at the edges. A little girl, maybe 2 or 3, with red hair and a round face. It was me, or close enough to be. "We didn't even know your name," she said. "You didn't speak at first. You were in shock. All we had was this." I stared at the photo, but my eyes kept drifting to the scar on my cheek in the reflection of the camper window. "My name's not Jessica," I said quietly. "Is it?" Neither of them answered. Somewhere outside, a bird called once and then went silent. The silence inside the camper was worse, heavier. I stood again and reached for the pocket of my jacket. My phone was there, cold from being out of reach. I turned it on. One message waiting. Samantha Clark had written back. I opened it without thinking. "I believe you," it said. "I've been looking for you for 10 years. Before I could respond, my dad reached over and grabbed the phone from my hands. "Wait, what is this?" he asked, scrolling quickly. When he saw the message, something shifted in his expression. Not anger, fear. He stood and moved toward the back of the camper. Then, without warning, he threw the phone against the wall. The screen shattered. Pieces skidded across the floor. I didn't move. Neither did my mom. For a second, it was like time had stopped. And then 3 sharp knocks on the camper door. We all turned. My dad didn't speak. My mom moved toward the window and peeked out through the curtain. "It's just someone from the campground," she said. But her voice had gone flat. The door creaked open a few inches before my dad could stop it, and a man's voice came through. "Evening. Just checking in. Everything all right in here?" His tone was casual, friendly. He couldn't see me from where he was standing. "Not yet." I took one step forward, then another, and before either of them could stop me, I slipped past the table and reached the door. The man looked startled at first, then his eyes took in my face. The scar, the tears I hadn't even realized were there. "Please," I said, "I need help." My voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. He heard it. He nodded once and turned toward the office. I stepped outside before my parents could stop me. Behind me, I heard the scramble of movement, my dad's footsteps, my mom calling my name, but I didn't look back. I just kept walking toward the light, toward someone who could finally hear me. The trees were quiet again, but now the quiet didn't feel safe. It felt like the pause before something else began. The campground office was warmer than I expected. Small space, low ceilings, a faint smell of pine cleaner, and old paper. The man who'd helped me, he said his name was Mr. Thompson, moved slowly, deliberately, like someone used to quiet routines and long silences. He led me to a chair just inside the door and called the local sheriff's office from a corded phone behind the desk. I heard him give the address, mention the camper, say something about a possible kidnapping. He didn't ask me too many questions. Just brought over a glass of water, then sat down across from me and stayed quiet until help arrived. I didn't say much. I couldn't. My legs were still shaking. My ears felt full. Every time I thought about what might have happened if I hadn't opened that door, I felt it again, that thick, paralyzing fog in my chest. I kept replaying my dad's voice, steady and low, saying, "It's not what you think." Over and over, like a loop I couldn't shut off. The sheriff's deputy got there first, then 2 officers in a marked cruiser. They came in fast but careful, the way people do when they're not sure if something's still in progress. I gave them my name, Jessica Miller, and told them I didn't think that was really my name. I told them about the newspaper. The missing girl. The photo that looked like me. One of them asked if I still had the paper, and I told him no. My dad had taken it. I told them about the drive, the camper, the message from Samantha Clark, and how my phone had been smashed against the wall. I could hear how strange it sounded as I said it out loud, but none of them interrupted. They just kept writing things down, nodding occasionally, keeping their voices low and even. Mr. Thompson gave a brief statement, too, about how I'd come running out of the camper, what I'd said, the way I looked. The officers asked if my parents were still inside. I told them no. They'd taken off into the woods the second I stepped out. A search team was called in along with a canine unit. They asked me to sit tight while they swept the forest, secured the campground perimeter. More cars started showing up, red and blue lights flashing against the trees. One officer brought out a heavy flashlight and began scanning the tree line. Another checked each of the other nearby campers just in case. I sat near the window, watching the movement outside, unable to do anything but breathe and wait. It didn't feel real. Any of it. I kept thinking about the glass of water, the heaviness in my limbs, the smell of the vinyl cushions. I could still see the shattered pieces of my phone on the camper floor. The memory of it hit in waves, sharp, then dull, then sharp again. One of the younger officers, Martinez, I think, asked if I had someone they could call. I told him about Sophie, that I'd been trying to go to her house when all this started. He promised they'd reach out, said she and her parents would be contacted soon. Then he asked me something else. "Is there a name you want us to use in the report?" I hesitated. "Maybe try both," I said. "Jessica Miller and Jenny Clark." He gave a quiet nod and jotted it down. The other officer, Rogers, stepped out to make a call, and I stayed in that same chair, tracing the edge of the wooden armrest with my fingers. Not thinking about much, just moving to stay steady. A little while later, Officer Martinez stepped back in and crouched beside me. "We reached out to the number from the newspaper," he said. "The woman who's been placing those ads, her name is Samantha Clark. She's on her way now." I didn't know what to do with that information. I just nodded. Another officer brought me a blanket. Someone handed me a juice box from the vending machine. I remember sipping it slowly, not tasting anything. The blanket felt scratchy and thin, but it was something. Eventually, I saw the back doors open and 2 officers walk in with James and Catherine in cuffs. They were dirty, scratched from brush and branches, their faces gray with something I didn't recognize at first. It wasn't shame, it wasn't anger, it was something emptier than that. My mom looked right at me. Her mouth opened slightly like she was going to say something, but no sound came out. My dad didn't look up at all. They were led down the hall without a word. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there with the blanket still wrapped around me and waited. About 30 minutes later, the front door opened again, and a woman stepped inside with 2 detectives. She looked like she'd come straight from work, hair pulled back, plain shirt, tired eyes. But the moment we saw each other, it was like everything else in the room dropped away. She had the same red hair, the same eyes. She walked toward me slowly like she didn't want to scare me off. "Jenny," she said. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. I stood. She didn't wait for a response. She crossed the space between us and pulled me into a hug so tight I couldn't breathe for a second. "You're alive," she whispered. "You're really here." We sat down side by side while the officers gave us space. She told me her name, Samantha Clark. She was 8 when I disappeared. I was 2. She remembered the foster home, the fire, how she'd always wondered if I made it out. She said she'd been placing ads every year on the same date my birthday, just in case, she said. I had to try something. She didn't ask for details. Not yet. I think we were both still too stunned to fill in the gaps. A social worker came in after a while and explained that we'd need to do a DNA test. They swabbed our cheeks right there at the station. Results would take a day, maybe less. I asked the officer if I could stay with Samantha in the meantime. She said they'd have to evaluate it, but given the circumstances, it would probably be allowed. Samantha nodded quickly. "She's coming with me," she said. "Whatever it takes." The 2 of us sat quietly for a long time after that, not talking, just breathing the same air, existing in the same space for the first time in a decade. My mind kept drifting back to the newspaper. That one photo, barely the size of a credit card, was the reason any of this had happened. I thought about how easily I could have missed it, how close I'd come to never knowing who I really was. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. But I remember the way Samantha's voice sounded when she said my name, Jenny, like she'd been carrying it with her all along. I wasn't ready to claim it yet, not completely. But I held it in my mind like a thread, something to follow, something that might eventually lead me back to myself. I didn't sleep at the station. Samantha stayed with me in the waiting area after the DNA swabs were taken, her hand resting lightly on mine, but neither of us said much. Every once in a while, someone from the department would check in or bring us something, a blanket, a soda, a quiet update. But the hours passed mostly in silence. I remember the sound of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the ticking of the wall clock across from the vending machine. It was the kind of silence that made small sounds feel too loud. Eventually, one of the detectives asked if I felt up to answering a few more questions. I said yes. They led me into a small interview room that looked exactly like I expected: plain walls, a table with a recorder built into the middle, 2 metal chairs on either side. I sat across from a woman named Detective Willis. Her voice was calm and slow, like she'd been doing this a long time. She started by asking me to walk her through everything again. Not just the camper or the message from Samantha, but all of it. When I first started questioning the scar, the newspaper, the conversation at the doctor's office, I did my best to tell it straight. No emotion, no guessing. Just what I saw, what I heard, what I felt in my stomach when my mom threw the newspaper out too fast, or when my dad insisted I was just tired. At one point, she asked if I remembered anything from before the age of 3. I shook my head. Only what they told me I said. And even that never really added up. She didn't write much down, just listened, nodding here and there. When I mentioned the scar again, that it was only on my face, not my arms or legs or anywhere else, she leaned back slightly in her chair. "That's not typical for house fires," she said. "Not if you were trapped inside." I knew that. I'd known it for a while. But hearing her say it out loud made it feel sharper, like a point clicking into place. When we finished, she asked if I needed anything else. Food, a break, a phone call. I said I was okay. Before I left the room, she said one last thing. "Sometimes," she said, "answers don't come the way we expect them to. But they come." I stepped back out into the hallway where Samantha was waiting. She had my overnight bag in her lap, the same one I'd packed in such a hurry before all of this started. Somehow, seeing it there made everything real in a way it hadn't been before. We rode in silence to her apartment, which was small but clean. 2 rooms, beige carpet windows that faced a brick wall across the alley. She offered me the bed and said she'd take the couch, but I couldn't sleep, so I stayed up in the living room while she dozed off in the other room. Around 3 in the morning, I found myself standing in the doorway to the kitchen, holding the edge of the counter just to feel something solid. That's when I saw the manila folder she'd left out on the table. It had my name written on it, Jenny, and a paperclip holding a bunch of documents together inside. I didn't open it. Not then. But I sat down in the chair beside it and stared at it for a long time. In the morning, we were asked to come back to the station. The DNA test had come back, and it was what we already knew. I was Jenny Clark, no question. Samantha cried when they said it, but I didn't. I think I'd used up all the tears I had. The officers said they'd be filing charges against James and Catherine, kidnapping, obstruction, unlawful restraint, but it would take time. There would be hearing statements, maybe a trial. I asked if I could see them, just once. The detectives didn't recommend it, but they didn't stop me either. They brought me to a side hallway where an officer stood outside an interview room. Inside, behind a small window, I could see them. My parents, or the people I'd called my parents, sitting side by side at the table, both of them looking older than I remembered. My mom was wringing her hands. My dad stared straight ahead like he couldn't see anything at all. I watched them for less than a minute. Then I turned away. Outside, Samantha was waiting by the car. She didn't ask me what I saw, just opened the door and let me climb in. On the way back to her apartment, she asked if I wanted to stop anywhere, grab a bite to eat, get some fresh air. I said no. All I wanted was to understand what came next. I asked her what she remembered from the fire. She said she was in school that day, and by the time she got home, the whole building was gone. They told her I'd died. No one ever investigated much. Too many missing files, too many unlicensed people running the place. I asked her how she found the number to put in the paper. She said she'd kept calling anyone who might remember. Old staff social workers, even someone from the local fire department. Most people didn't pick up. The ones who did didn't have answers. But she kept going. Every year she placed the same notice, same picture, same phone number. It didn't cost much, she said, but it was the only thing I could do. That night I finally opened the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, photocopied reports, a few printed emails. There wasn't much. My early years had mostly vanished in the fire, but what was there was enough. A list of names, a map, a blurry black and white photo of the orphanage building before it burned. I held it up to the light, scanning every corner of the image, trying to spot something that would spark a memory. But there was nothing. Just smoke in the distance, a row of broken windows, and a rusted-out swing set barely visible on the edge of the frame. Still, something about it stuck with me. The way the front gate leaned to one side. The faint shape of a sign above the door, too charred to read but still there. I traced my finger over it without thinking. That night, as I lay awake on the pull-out couch, I kept turning that image over in my head. I wasn't sure yet what it meant, but I had a feeling it was the beginning of something. Not an answer, maybe, but a direction. And after everything that had been taken, a direction was enough. It was Samantha who made the call. She'd found the number at the bottom of one of the older reports she kept in the folder, a retired investigator named Dan Halpern, who'd worked child protection cases in the late 90s. The man had a reputation for following threads long after others let them go. She left a message on his landline, not expecting much, but he called back that same night. Said he remembered the orphanage fire, said the case never sat right with him. 2 days later, we met him at a small diner just outside of town. He was older now, moved a little slower, but his eyes were sharp. He brought a box with him, documents, photos, a few cassette tapes in worn plastic cases. We slid into the booth, ordered coffee, and he started talking like he'd been waiting years for someone to ask. He said there were gaps in the story from the beginning. The orphanage saint. Jerome's had been under investigation for licensing violations before the fire. Unreported staff turnover, financial irregularities. Rumors of children disappearing from the records, but nothing ever stuck. He said, no one wanted to dig too deep, not back then. I asked him about the fire. He leaned back, took a sip of coffee, then tapped the table slowly with his fingers. Started in the back, he said. Storage room, supposedly, but the reports were rushed. No autopsies on the remains they did find. No follow-up on the kids who were listed as relocated. He looked at me. And no one came looking for you. I sat very still. He reached into the box and pulled out a photo, black and white, grainy, but clear enough to make out faces. Children standing in front of a cinder block building, a few adults behind them. He pointed to a woman in the back row. That's Sandra Bishop, he said. Head administrator. Real name was something else she used, at least 3 aliases I could trace. Last known location, Oregon. Then she vanished. He paused. You ever heard that name before? I hadn't, but the name stuck. Sandra Bishop. He went on to explain that there was never an official list of every child in that building. Records had been destroyed, misplaced, rewritten. It was easy to hide someone in a system like that, he said, especially if they were small, especially if no one was looking. Samantha asked if he had anything tying Sandra to my supposed parents. He hesitated. Not directly, he said, but I have something that might get us closer. He slid a cassette across the table. Labeled in pen, St. Jerome Intake, March 1987. It's an intake interview, he said, with a woman claiming to be placing a child temporarily. No name given. But the voice, it matches a recording I pulled later from a county tax document signed by Catherine Miller. My chest tightened. Samantha looked at me, then reached for the tape. Where can we play this? She asked. Dan smiled faintly. Got a player in my truck. We walked out together, the afternoon sun slanting low across the parking lot. His truck was old but clean, He opened the passenger door and reached under the seat for a small, battery-powered tape recorder. Popped the cassette in, pressed play. The audio was scratchy. A woman's voice, clear but tense, spoke first. "She's just staying for a while. Her parents passed. I'm a distant cousin." Then a man's voice, probably the intake worker. He asked questions, name, birth date, length of stay. The woman avoided most of them, said she didn't have the documents with her, that things had happened fast. Then the man asked the child's name. A pause. Then Jennifer Lynn. The voice that said it, I knew it. Even distorted by tape and age, I knew it. It was her, Catherine, or whoever she really was. I stepped back from the truck, the air suddenly thick around me. Samantha hit stop. We stood there in silence for a long moment. Dan finally spoke. "I can't prove what happened after that," he said. "But I think maybe a few someones used St. Jerome's as a place to funnel kids, to reassign identities. And when it got too messy, they let it burn." He looked me straight in the eye. "You weren't the only one." He handed Samantha a sheet of paper, names, partial dates, notations about transfers that were never completed. "Most of these kids were under 5, he said, and after the fire they disappeared completely." I took the paper. My hands were cold. At the bottom of the list, circled in pencil, was one name, Ellie M., age 3, intake, July 1987. Samantha reached over and put a hand on my shoulder. "We need to find out what happened to them," I said. Dan nodded. "I can help you dig. But it won't be easy." We left the diner with a copy of the tape and a photocopy of the intake record. That night, back in Samantha's apartment, we cleared off the kitchen table and spread everything out. Old documents, maps, timelines. I stared at that photo of the orphanage again, at the way the children were standing, the blankness on their faces, the woman in the back, Sandra Bishop. I still didn't remember her. But I felt something, a kind of static in my mind, like a memory trying to push through. Samantha made tea while I cross-referenced dates. She hovered close, careful not to crowd me, but I could feel her watching every time I paused too long over a name or a face. Just after midnight, I noticed something. One of the notations on Dan's list, the intake for Ellie M., was processed a full week after the fire was supposed to have destroyed the building. I pointed to it. Samantha leaned in. "That shouldn't be possible," she said. We checked the fire report again. Date of destruction, June 28th. But the intake date for Ellie was July 3rd, 5 days later. Maybe it wasn't the fire that ended things, I said. Maybe it was what happened after. We sat there for a while, staring at that single entry, letting the implications settle. Then Samantha opened her laptop. "I'm going to find out who processed that file," she said, "and where it went after that." I nodded. The night was silent around us, the windows reflecting only our own shapes hunched over papers and screens. Somewhere out there, the truth was buried. But it hadn't disappeared. Not completely. And we were closer now than we'd ever been. The records office was in a basement annex of the county building, fluorescent lights, gray walls, rows of beige file cabinets. We signed in at the front desk, gave them the list of names from Dan's file, and waited. Samantha tapped her pen against a notepad. I stared at the hallway where the clerk had disappeared. It was quiet, except for the hum of the lights and the occasional slam of a file drawer opening somewhere down the corridor. After about 20 minutes, the clerk came back holding a folder much thinner than we'd hoped. "This is all we have under that intake number," she said. She handed it to me like it was just another piece of paper, not the weight of someone's life. Inside, there were only 2 sheets. One was a standard intake summary, child female, 3 years old, no identifying documents admitted under emergency care, July 3rd, 1987. The second was a transfer notice dated July 8th, assigning the child to a temporary guardian, Sandra Bishop. No address listed, no follow-up contact, just a stamped signature and a case ID that had been scratched out and rewritten. We brought the folder back to the table and laid it flat. Samantha hovered over my shoulder. "That name again," she said. "Sandra Bishop." The paper was brittle at the edges, the kind of dry that happens when something's been sitting untouched for decades. I scanned every line looking for something, anything, that didn't match. That's when I noticed the signature on the bottom corner of the transfer form, K. Miller. My breath caught. "She signed this," I said. "Catherine. She signed as the witness." Samantha leaned in closer. "That ties her to Bishop," she whispered. She wasn't just a fake cousin. She was part of it. We took copies, packed everything up, and walked out into the late morning sun. I don't remember the drive back to Samantha's place. My mind kept circling the same thing. If Catherine had signed off on that transfer, then she knew where I came from. She knew who else was in that building. She might have known what happened to them. But she chose to keep me and vanish. That night I called Dan. He said he'd dug up something else, a property in rural Idaho that had once been owned under a Bishop alias. It was registered to a Sarah Benson, but cross-referencing tax records, he found the same P.O. box Catherine had used during the years I was supposedly homeschooled. It's probably nothing, he said, but it's the only other thread we've got. I looked at Samantha. She nodded before I even said anything. The next morning, we packed up her car and drove. 7 hours on the highway, mostly quiet. Flat stretches of land, old barns, scrub trees that leaned with the wind. It was early evening by the time we pulled onto a gravel road, the sun just starting to dip behind the hills. The property was fenced, but the gate hung crooked on one hinge. No signs, no mailbox, just a rutted drive that led up to a weathered cabin set back behind a row of bare-limbed trees. We parked just outside and walked up slow. The porch creaked under our feet. Samantha knocked. No answer. We waited, then tried again. Nothing. The windows were covered with yellowed newspaper and plastic sheeting. The whole place looked abandoned, but not empty. The door wasn't locked. It stuck a little, but when I pushed it, gave way with a dry groan. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and dust. It was dark, but enough light filtered through the gaps in the window coverings to see shapes, a couch, a table, boxes stacked near the far wall. We stepped in carefully, not touching anything at first. Then Samantha flicked on the flashlight she'd brought and aimed it at the walls. They were covered in paper. Not wallpaper pages. Newspaper clippings. Notes. Photocopies of what looked like school rosters and adoption forms. Photos of children, most of them grainy, all of them labeled by hand. Dates, codes, sometimes just single words. Moved, gone, safe. Samantha moved closer to the wall. "These are case notes," she said. Someone was tracking them. I stood in front of a photo labeled LEM. It was a black and white shot taken from the side. A little girl sitting on the edge of a porch, bare feet, a doll in her lap. The handwriting below it was faded but still legible, July 1987, moved to BP under SB orders. BP. I said out loud, "That could be a place," Samantha said. Or a person. There was a file cabinet in the corner. I opened the top drawer. It was full of folders labeled by year. I pulled one from 1987. Inside were intake logs, some duplicates of what we'd already seen, but some new. One name repeated itself every few pages, Sandra Bishop. And every time it appeared, there was a different alias beside it. She hadn't just vanished, she'd changed shape over and over. But the pattern was the same. She'd take custody file nothing further and disappear with the child. Samantha was flipping through another folder when she suddenly stopped. "Jenny," she said. "Look at this." It was a transport record. Handwritten, no official seal, but dated 2 weeks after the fire. Child transferred to private care, it said. Condition stable. Location secure. And the child's ID number. It matched mine. We stood there in silence, the weight of it pressing down all at once. "They didn't think I'd make it," I said quietly. "But I did, and they took me anyway." Behind us something creaked. We turned. Nothing moved. Just the wind outside brushing the plastic on the windows. But the stillness inside had changed. The room felt heavier, like the past was still there watching. We gathered what we could, copies of photos, papers, a few notebooks, and backed out the way we came. Locked the door behind us even though it barely held. As we drove away, Samantha kept glancing at the mirror. "You think someone's still watching this place?" she asked. I didn't answer. Not right away. Because I wasn't sure if it was someone or something else. Something about that house hadn't felt empty. It had felt waiting. And somewhere I still believed there was more to uncover. There wasn't a single moment where it all felt finished. No gavel drop, no final report, no newspaper headline that said, "This is what happened." What we got instead was a quiet kind of closing. A hallway outside a courtroom where Sandra Bishop, if that's even her real name, was finally taken into custody. She didn't fight, didn't speak, just stared at me like I was the one out of place, like I'd wandered into a story she thought she'd buried for good. The charges were complicated: child endangerment fraud, unlawful adoption practices, but most of what she'd done fell through the cracks of the law. Too old, too many fake identities, too many missing records. What mattered, though, was that she couldn't keep hiding behind another name. And when she saw the photos Samantha had collected, the wall of children, the timelines, the notes in Catherine's handwriting, something in her shifted. Just a flicker in her face. Like for 1 second she saw every one of them again. Catherine never resurfaced. We don't know if she fled or if she died long before we got close. But the house in Idaho gave us more than we ever expected. There were names we handed off to investigators, families that got phone calls after decades of silence. Some were too afraid to respond. Others had moved on, created new stories, left the past locked away. I don't blame them. The kind of trauma that buries children for 30 years doesn't let go easy. As for me, I never got my birth certificate. Never found anyone who remembered a little girl named Jenny before the fire. But I don't need it now. I have the intake number, the case file, the photo on the porch with my name written in faded ink, and I have Samantha who never once let the silence win, who drove every mile, read every page, stood beside me in every room. She didn't need to believe everything. She just needed to believe me. Dan kept digging even after the arrests. Turned over files to federal authorities, helped match case numbers to old social worker logs. He said one day maybe someone would build a database that makes sure this never happens again. But for now, it's still mostly paper. Still mostly whispers. Sometimes I go back to that house in Idaho. Not inside. I just sit across the road near the gate that still leans on one hinge. I think about the girl I was when I walked out of that fire. I think about the others who didn't make it out. Some names we'll never know. Some voices we'll never find. But I hear them sometimes in quiet ways. In the way the wind moves through the porch beams. In the hush before dawn. In the pages that survived even when the people didn't. I don't tell this story for closure. There isn't any. Not really. But there's clarity, and there's truth. And for me, that's enough. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no child's name stays buried in a folder or lost behind a locked door. Someone out there still needs to be found.